Hello, this is Julie from Technique Tuesday, and today I am showing you how I made this card using the Bubbles on the Border die and the Lotus from the Greenhouse Society. So first thing, of course, is the watercolors. I decided to do a kind of a weird color scheme using a sort of blue tint overall. I have my watercolors here and my brushes, a paper towel, and some water. First thing I'm going to do, since I'm remembering to do it, is put down a water wash. Next, I'll put in a bit of color. I'm starting with this pale blue. I'll water it down a tiny bit before I start putting it in only around the edges. And I'm going to be pretty loose about this. Because it's blue, I'm not worried about making it look realistic. I'll go through and put it in the whole image. Little bits of color get dropped into the ends of these petals. If I don't like where it's gone, I'll move it around a bit while it's still wet. When I'm doing that, I'll dry out my brush and it'll help move that wet color around a little bit. The dry brush will also soak up a bit of the color that went down too heavily. I keep going on that until I get something like this. The next step is to add in the other colors. I'm using purple and green and a little bit of yellow, and I'm just daubing it in, letting it be loose and painterly. Because this one is dry, I'm adding water back in, but you don't need to let it dry between colors. The wet on wet method is great because it adds a sort of random touch. Here's the purple that I'm using. I'm putting it into the insides of the flower and just putting in a tiny hint of color. I'm not trying for realistic because, of course, this is blue, but I want to give you the idea. I'll wet this down a bit and add some green to the leaf here, just a hint. Do the same thing with the yellow, wet it down a bit, and add just a tiny bit of yellow. I'll get those hints in everywhere and come up with something a bit like this. And this is the final product for the painting part, but only the first step in actually making the card. The next card making step is to cut out the lotus using the coordinating die. So I've run through the die cutter, and I'm going to unstick it and make sure that all the pieces have fallen out. And I'll set it aside for a bit. Now I have a piece of blue paper for my bubbles. I have a piece of paper that is 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches, and I've scored it to fold into a 4.25 by 5.5 inch card. I will die cut it using the Bubbles on the Border die, like this. I will pull this extra piece away and save it for another project, and then pull the paper out for my card. I'll keep the circles here and poke a couple of them out to use on the card later. So now I have my blue piece as well as a green piece that I've cut out previously. I also have a white card that is cut to 4.25 by 5.5 that will go behind both of these bubble pieces. To decide what angle I wanted to cut the green bubbles at, I sort of lined up the die against the blue and decided that I wanted the big bubble to be down here and kind of offset, and I wanted it to overlap up top and on the bottom. Then I put my piece of green in, or should have while I was figuring out the angle, and I used some Post-it tape to stick the right side of the die to the green before I pulled it away from the blue bubbles. And then I ran it through the die cutter. And now the next thing I do is start gluing things down. I'll start on this side, and I'm using these rectangles of double-sided tape that we cut down from larger sheets. But you can use the kind that comes in a roll, of course, which would probably be easier. I'm cutting the pieces down to fit and sticking them down in various spots in the solid part of this flap. I'll burnish them down pretty well so that the red is easier to pull off. Next is the glue for the lacy parts of the die cut. I'm using this on-point glue that we sell on the website, and I sort of test it on my paper towel to make sure it's coming out like I expect it to. Then I just trace the edge here. I like this stuff because I can see where it's gone and how wet it is, and of course it's really secure too. I'll let this get a little bit tacky. Now I'll remove the red strips to expose the sticky tape. I'll line up the white paper inside against the fold and then carefully fold the flap back over it. I'll make sure the tape is stuck first and then press down the glued parts. I'll hold it like this for a few seconds and voila, it's stuck. Now to do the same thing on the green side. Lots of tape goes in, and then I trace the bubbles with glue, and I will wait for it to get tacky again and pull off the tape backing before I line it up along the edge of the white piece. Then everything gets stuck down, and I have my background. Next is adding the lotus and embellishments. The lotus needs to be popped up a bit, so I'm going to use some foam squares. I use a lot of them because I don't want the flower to get folded down and ruin all of my hard work. I'll remove all the backing and hover the lotus over the background to figure out where I want it to be in relation to the bubbles. The sentiment is next. I stamped the phrase "Hi there" from the lotus stamp set onto a piece of white cardstock and cut it out using a 1-inch circle. I'll use another piece of foam and stick it down here. The glass embellishments are next. We have a nice little mix here of various embellishments and sort of a ocean color mix. I decided I should have about 5 little doohickeys, and I chose a couple of clear dots and a couple of blue tinted dots. And then I thought about a pearlized green dot and didn't like it, so I went and found a silvery dot from another set we have. It's a good idea to have an uneven number of pieces, so I go with either 3 or 5. It just makes the layout a little bit more interesting. I sort of figure out where I want things to go before I start gluing things. I'm also going to add a couple of the blue bubble pieces from the die cut. Once I've decided where they should go, I'll use tweezers and some Tombow liquid glue to get it all stuck down. Bev used this method in a video a couple of weeks ago, and I liked it so much I snagged it. I put a little tiny dot of glue on my finger and then pick up the glass dot with the tweezers and just touch it to the glue. And then I put it back down again. I'll go through and do that for all of the pieces, including the paper dots. This glue dries clear, so I don't have to worry about it showing through the glass droplets. And here's my card. I will wait for it to dry before I send it off to someone who could use a pep talk. I hope you saw something you could use and that you enjoyed watching. Thanks for stopping by today.